The road to Duskvale was paved with silence. Elise Foster's car was the only sound cutting through the dense, fog-wrapped forest. The further she drove, the more her phone glitched. First the signal dropped, then her GPS spun aimlessly. Trees on either side grew unnaturally close, forming a tunnel of knotted branches that blocked out sunlight. As she passed an old sign half swallowed by vines that simply read, Duskvale, a sudden pressure settled in her chest. The air felt heavier, colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was as if the land itself was trying to reject her, whispering she didn't belong here. The town appeared abruptly, as though it had been hidden until the last second. Buildings stood intact but lifeless, paint peeling, windows clouded with grime, and doors closed like mouths mid-sentence. There were no people in sight. A clock tower still ticked, yet showed no time. Elise stepped out of her car, boots crunching on cracked cobblestone as she looked around. A single breeze moved through the streets, yet none of the trees swayed. Every shopfront held a haunting sameness: boarded windows, faded paint, and missing persons posters. Hundreds of them, all dated within the last 2 years, and none older. Her breath caught when she noticed one poster in particular, a girl with red hair tied in a bun, wearing a backpack that looked identical to hers. The name was Forrester. The resemblance was uncanny, yet wrong in a way she couldn't explain. She tore her gaze away and continued walking, drawn toward the sound of a distant bell tolling, though there was no church in sight. The sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the buildings like laughter trapped in stone. As Elise followed the cobbled road deeper, the fog seemed to coil behind her, sealing off her way back. Every direction looked the same: rows of houses with locked gates, rusted swings creaking in empty yards, and shadows that didn't match their sources. Her footsteps sounded muffled now, like walking through wet cloth. She finally reached the heart of Duskvale, a circular town square with a dry fountain in the center and benches around it that looked recently used. A faint humming noise vibrated the ground, almost like distant electricity or breathing. Elise stood in the middle, heart pounding. She didn't know who had summoned her here, but she was beginning to suspect this place wasn't waiting for her arrival. It was luring her home. Elise's investigation led her out of the town square and down a narrow, winding lane obscured by overgrown hedges. At the end of the path stood a peculiar mansion that defied description, known by locals only as the house with no address. Its dark, ivy-clad walls seemed to absorb rather than reflect the meager light from the foggy street lamps. There were no visible numbers or names on the weathered stone facade. Only a heavy wooden door set in an arched opening, inviting and forbidding at once. As she drew nearer, an unsettling silence fell over her, broken only by the soft creaks of the ancient wood and the distant echo of a wind that carried secrets. Elise stepped onto the cracked stone pathway leading to the entrance, her footsteps echoing amid the pervasive stillness. The large door, painted in fading black and scarred with time, swung open silently at her touch as if guided by an unseen hand. Inside, a long corridor extended into darkness, the walls lined with portraits whose eyes appeared to follow her every move. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of her flashlight, revealing long, forgotten trinkets scattered about. A broken clock, a tarnished candlestick, and the lingering scent of damp decay. She sensed that every object here had a story of loss and mystery etched into its form. Venturing further into the house, Elise discovered rooms that defied logical arrangement. Hallways twisted abruptly into dead ends, and doorways led to voids of uneven architecture. One room, bathed in an eerie, pale luminescence from unseen sources, caught her attention. Faded wallpaper depicted strange symbols, and scattered papers lay on a rickety desk. Each artifact seemed deliberately placed, as if arranged by a careful hand whose intent was both cryptic and foreboding. The house exuded an atmosphere of abandonment and unspoken dread, each echo in the corridors hinting at the memories of those who had vanished within its walls. With apprehension building, Elise entered a modest sitting area where furniture lay covered in white sheets. The silence was punctuated by a subtle hum, almost imperceptible, that seemed to emanate from the very walls. A small, ornate table stood in the center, upon which rested a single, cracked porcelain doll with eyes that mirrored sorrow and longing. In that moment, the house revealed a disturbing duality. It was at once an untouched relic of a bygone era and a vessel for untold tragedies. Every element conspired to create an unsettling invitation, as though the building itself called out to her, urging her to uncover the secrets hidden within its vacant halls. As night fell over Duskvale, the atmosphere inside the house grew heavier, more charged, as if the walls themselves were beginning to breathe. Elise stood in the hallway outside the sitting room, and the silence she had grown accustomed to began to shift, replaced by the soft, indistinct murmur of voices. At first, she assumed it was wind moving through cracks in the walls. But then the whispers began to form words, fragmented and pleading. They seemed to come from every direction, one moment in her left ear, the next from the ceiling above. A cold chill wrapped around her spine as she realized they were calling her name. She followed the sounds through a narrow corridor that hadn't been there earlier. The walls were close together, too close, and the deeper she moved, the more the whispers layered on top of one another. They spoke in different languages, different tones, some urgent, others filled with despair. Elise stopped at a door that hadn't appeared before, its surface pulsing faintly like skin. A single word echoed loudly through the darkness: "Help." She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the door. It was warm. The voices abruptly fell silent, replaced by the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps from the other side. Inside the room was a strange chamber of mirrors. Dozens of tall, cracked panels stood at odd angles, reflecting warped versions of Elise's form, each one subtly different. In one, her eyes were hollow; in another, her mouth moved though she made no sound. As she passed between the mirrors, more whispers emerged. Not from around her, but from inside the reflections. They seemed to mock her, imitate her, or plead with her. One voice, however, stood out. It was clearer than the rest, and it spoke not to scare, but to warn. "Don't let it out," it whispered. Elise spun around, but no one was there, just her own distorted reflection, now crying blood. Disoriented and terrified, Elise stumbled out of the mirror room, only to find herself in a hallway she didn't recognize. The layout of the house had changed again. The walls seemed to close in, pulsing with faint movement, as if the entire structure were alive and reacting to her presence. The whispers returned, now sounding closer, almost inside her own thoughts. A sense of claustrophobia overcame her. She felt the house's presence tightening around her, studying her. Somewhere beyond the walls, she was certain, something ancient and malevolent waited. And it was growing more aware of her with every step she took deeper into its haunted heart. The town's clock tower struck midnight with a hollow clang that echoed across the empty streets of Duskvale. Elise stood frozen at the edge of the stairwell, where the air had grown thick and time itself felt fractured. As the final chime rang out, the lights in the house dimmed to nothing, leaving her in complete darkness. A low hum pulsed beneath her feet, and the house groaned as if waking from slumber. All around her, the temperature plummeted. Doors slammed in the distance. She turned to leave, but the staircase was gone. In its place was a blank wall. Elise was trapped, and she knew now that midnight was no longer just a time. It was a threshold. The mirror room was gone too. In its place stood a hallway lined with portraits, none of which she remembered seeing before. Each frame held the face of someone frightened. Someone screaming, someone missing. They weren't just pictures, they were warnings. A portrait at the very end caught her attention. It was her. Not as she looked now, but how she had looked moments ago, in fear, trapped in the house. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached out to touch the canvas. The surface rippled beneath her fingers like water, and the face blinked back at her. That's when she realized, this house wasn't just a building. It was a trap for souls. She turned and ran, blindly moving through the shifting corridors, trying to retrace steps that no longer existed. The walls changed shape, doors vanished behind her, and windows opened into black voids. Every time she passed a mirror, her reflection lagged slightly behind her movements, as if something else was learning to imitate her. The whispers grew louder and clearer now. No longer random voices, but a single chant. The vanished return only when forgotten. Elise's thoughts grew foggy, her memories disjointed. The house was eroding her sense of reality, trying to overwrite her mind like ink bleeding through old paper. She screamed, but even her own voice sounded foreign. Then she found it, a door, not ornate or cursed looking, but plain and wooden. It stood quietly in the center of an otherwise empty wall. A sense of stillness radiated from it. With trembling hands, she turned the knob. The door creaked open to reveal a small room with a single object, the journal she'd used to find the house, now resting atop a pedestal. But the pages were blank. Elise flipped through them in desperation, and as she reached the end, she found a final line scrawled in fresh ink. The vanishing hour claims all who remember. She looked up, and in the corner of the room, her reflection stood without a mirror, smiling cruelly. The door slammed shut behind Elise, sealing her in with the silent imposter that wore her face. Panic surged as she backed away, but her body no longer responded with ease. Each movement felt delayed, muffled, as if she were underwater. The air thickened, pressing in around her like a living thing. The room dimmed, the only light coming from the mirrorless reflection, standing still, blinking unnaturally slowly. Elise turned to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The imposter stepped forward, raising one hand. Elise's hand mimicked the motion against her will. She realized then, this was no entity mimicking her. It was replacing her, piece by piece. Far away in the waking world, Duskvale stirred with quiet unease. The townspeople whispered about the old house again, how it seemed different lately, more watchful. A local boy pointed at the window one morning and claimed he saw someone inside, mouthing words he couldn't hear. That same day, a traveling hiker named Elise was reported missing. Her car remained by the roadside, keys still in the ignition, her notebook on the passenger seat. Inside the house, her journal had closed itself, resting silently on the pedestal. A new name had been inked into its final page. The ink hadn't dried yet. Back in the hidden room, the imposter stretched its neck, adjusting to Elise's stolen form. It blinked twice, tilted its head, and walked toward the pedestal. The pages of the journal began to turn in reverse. Behind it, the wall cracked open like a wound, revealing a corridor lined with doors. Each bore a name in faded lettering, one by one. The names were scratched out, except for the most recent Elise Wren. With a final glance into the dark, the new Elise stepped through the corridor, vanishing into the house's ever-shifting maze. The door to the outside world reopened, just long enough to invite another in. Some weeks later, another traveler, curious about the folklore, arrived in Duskvale. He spoke with locals, took notes, and followed the same fading trail through the woods to the house with no address. The front door was already slightly open. As he stepped over the threshold, a breeze closed it softly behind him. The lights flickered. From deep within the house, a quiet laugh echoed through the halls. And then, as always, the silence returned. Duskvale marked one more soul missing, and the house added another face to its ever-growing collection. Framed in shadow, staring, waiting for the next to come looking.